Hey everybody, this is another special episode of Cloudy with a Chance of podcast, except this week we're doing a vodcast.
So exciting. We've got a lot to talk about today. We have dealt with dry conditions in the Miami Valley for weeks upon weeks, and that's created some problems for us locally.
Exactly, and a local expert, I would say, to talk about what we can do when it comes to fire safety, and something that we've been seeing a lot recently has been brush fires and fires in fields. So we do have Fire Chief Jeff Leaming with us. You've been a podcast guest before, actually.
I have. This is the first time for the video podcast or video cast or VCast, whatever you call it. But yeah, I'm looking forward to it. It's going to be fun.
All right. So why don't you just give us a little bit of background on yourself, Chief Leaming?
Well, I've been in the fire service since high school, actually. So it's been my entire life's mission is to be in the fire service. And I was fortunate to work several years in the city of Xenia, worked for the state of Ohio for a period of time, and now I'm back locally in Sugarcreek as their fire chief. So
wonderful.
Yeah. It's good things.
Yeah.
Lot of experiences, and you guys want to talk about some
Yeah.
fire issues, and part of my mission is just education. So I'm glad to have the opportunity to speak to you guys today about drought conditions and the fires.
And I think that this conversation stretches outside of the Miami Valley because we're not the only ones dealing with drought, and we see all the times, especially in the news lately out in California, dry conditions out there is not something that's not uncommon, and just one little spark of a flame could lead to a wildfire. We don't have the type of trees that they have out there in California, but certainly we don't want to be stuck in a situation that we're having to call you guys out to battle a brush fire for something that could have been avoided.
Right, and we're very fortunate in Ohio that we don't have the conditions that they have in California with the winds and all the vegetation. Now, we do have problems, and this time of year, you have to be very, very cautious when you're having any fire at all because the conditions are so dry, and especially this year when we're dealing with the drought, as you guys well know.
Yeah.
Now, you are also a farmer, so you can kind of speak to this as well, is that a lot of our farmers, their crops did not flourish the way that they did in a typical year, and that could lead to a lot more fields being dry and perhaps having like dry corn in that. Can you talk to about how that could create a fire situation?
Yeah. Well, the corn is dry. It's dried down. It's reached its maximum potential as far as growth when it starts to turn color. So corn, when it's green, it's still growing and it's still absorbing moisture. When the ears drop down and they turn downward, it's basically finished. The crop is done growing, but it's at maximum dryness now. So it will continue to dry in the field. And I've talked to some folks that are running some crops right now, and it's the driest that they've had in years right out of the field. Normally they'll have to take it from the field, and especially corn, and put it into a dryer and dry it down to where you can store it. Corn, if it's over about 15% moisture, you have to dry it down below that so it'll store. Otherwise, it could get moldy.
Okay.
So this year they're able to take it right out of the field and put it into a grain bin and store it with maybe minimal air. And so that tells you a lot as far as this time of year. Already in early October or mid-October, we're having dry conditions to where they can take it right out of the field, which is kind of unheard of.
Wow, that is pretty. I guess I never really realized that drying process needs to be done when they store it, and then, like you said, like that's not normal for us to just be able to take it right from the field and store it.
Yeah, soybeans is a little different. Same thing though, once the greenness starts and the leaves start dropping off, you'll see the soybeans field turn brown. There won't be any leaves, it'll just be a stem and the pods. The pods have the crop. Soybeans dry down relatively quickly when they transition from leaves dropping, and they'll be in a position to where they can be stored right away. So you'll see the beans be running first in a lot of cases, but there's farmers this year running their corn because it's dry. So they're basically playing, which field can I get to first and harvesting. So they're having really great conditions to harvest, but then on our side, the conditions are so dry that we have to be very cautious about setting a field on fire.
I was going to say, so I thought that I had read at least one of the brush fires locally that it was when they were working on the field that it was almost as if the machine is
combine?
Is that able, like, is the machinery that they're using in the harvest able to spark a fire?
Absolutely. Anytime a machine is running, there's something moving, and the moving parts, if it's not been properly maintained, you could have a bearing that overheats. You've got fodder that may be at close proximity to that, and you could set not only the vehicle or the machine on fire, the combine, you could set the field on fire. And for instance, I did respond to a fire like that in Spring Valley last week. We went mutual aid for a field fire that was started by someone bush hogging, we believe, and set several acres of corn fodder on fire Fortunately, the farmer was able to keep it out of his field that was still standing, and he didn't really lose that much crop, but he potentially could have. So.
Right.
So have you found that there's an uptick in brush fires this year because of how dry we are, or just have we been fortunate not to get out of control?
We're seeing more brush fires. We had another yesterday that we went mutual aid with Washington Township, where some folks were doing something they shouldn't have been doing. I think that they were trying to get some bees or some hornets, and they were using an ignitable liquid, which we would never advocate using, but it set the woods on fire, and it also set an abandoned building on fire. So, not that there's a lot of loss, financial loss and implications, but just think about all the responders.
I was going to say the resources you guys had to use.
And you have to put it out, or otherwise it's going to continue to grow and could get to something of value, somebody's home or property that's something that they don't want to burn.
Now, we talk all the time that like one little spark can ignite like a brush fire. How quick can that happen? Like I know that some people are like, I'm just gonna do a little
fire
bonfire
in my
and
yard,
it'll be fine, and I could put it out with
and
some
that's why
water.
There's a lot of restrictions as far as when to burn and what size fire you can have. The Ohio Revised Code, it's in law. The U.S. or Ohio EPA and the Ohio Department of Natural Resources, Division of Forestry, has restrictions. For instance, you're not allowed to burn anything of trash or dead animals, but that's not the reason that they don't want you to burn also during certain times of the day, when the relative humidity is low. So from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m., it's been in the revised code for years, there's a burn restriction as far as burning brush, and that's because the relative humidity in October and November is really low. So not only during the drought conditions, but any time of year or any year in October and November, there's no open burning. So at night they allow it, but it's when the relative humidity is increased, when there's some moisture in the air, or some dew, if you will.
Yeah, and then, once you get past 6 o'clock, you need to understand what's going on with the weather on that particular day. Because if we have a windy evening, just because it's past 6 o'clock, that could enhance that fire danger even further, even if your relative humidity isn't so low.
Exactly.
And we live in a lot of communities where they'll even vacuum up leaves. We used to have leaf fires in a lot of our communities because people would burn those. And those leaves, once they start burning, it's like paper. They will float.
And then just drop somewhere else.
Go somewhere else and start a fire in a building or another leaf pile. And so we're very fortunate that we don't burn leaves any longer, especially inside our communities. We would never advocate that. And some of the other restrictions for burning, open burning, is you're not allowed to start a fire within 1,000 feet of another person's property.
Oh, didn't know that.
I didn't know that either.
Structure.
Okay.
So you can do it within 1,000 feet of your property, but you have to be at least 3 football fields away from somebody else's. Wow. Otherwise, you could be charged with criminal damaging if you cause harm to their property.
Oh my goodness. I didn't know that. I know.
And okay, so let's talk about bonfires this time of year, or people that have fire pits, because now we're starting to get the cooler nights, and people are going to want to do their fire pit, or maybe just start a fire in their backyard. Is there any tips and/or restrictions they should know about? Because this isn't a normal year. Your grass is crunchy and dry and. You know what I mean? Like, this is definitely a year to be extra cautious.
First, if you live inside a municipality, you need to check with your local fire department to see if they allow for open burning. In most cases, you can use a purchased chimney. You can see a fire pit that would have a chimney to it. You can usually burn those relatively simply. But if you're going to burn a pile of rubbish, it needs to be 1,000 feet away from, not rubbish, I'm sorry, but brush. It needs to be 1,000 feet away from another structure. So you really can't do that inside a municipality. You're not going to have the distances you need. So backyard bonfires are pretty much limited to very small ceremonial cooking type fires if your local jurisdiction allows for it. And the size of that fire has to be seasoned hardwood. It can't be larger than 3 foot by 3 foot by 2 foot in height. And needs to be maintained, you have to keep it in a small little condensed area. You need to have something that you can put it out with, some water. I would advocate a hose. And most importantly, stay with it while it's burning. Don't just walk away with a pile burning, because embers could float away and start something that you really didn't want to catch fire.
Yeah, how dangerous could that be as well? Maybe when you think you put a fire out in your backyard, or even if you were camping or something, you know, is that common that it's
I think
like,
of Smokey the Bear, you know, and Smokey the Bear would, I think, bury
He'd be
his
really
fire
upset.
with his shovel and
There you
put
go.
dirt on top of it before they would walk away. So I would make sure that it's out and put water to it and make sure that there's no smoke or embers still burning when you go inside or go away from that fire.
okay.
It's very interesting. A lot of this stuff I didn't know before
Yeah.
because I know that I've been in neighborhoods before where people are doing fires and they're
Sure.
very close to their neighbor's house.
Yeah.
You know, fortunately nothing happened,
Right.
but I never realized that there could be a legal repercussion
Right, if for some
if for some reason you were to catch your neighbor's property on fire.
Well, not only legal, you could have civil liabilities. So if you cause harm to another's property or damage, hopefully not to somebody's person, there's going to be civil and legal implications.
Oh, so you really have to be careful.
Now, also this time of year, we're coming up, and we talk about this a lot in weather, where we flip our clocks back an hour, push them ahead. It's back an hour.
Yes.
It's fall back.
Fall back.
We always talk about that's the time to go ahead and check your smoke detectors.
Yeah.
Why is that so important? And speaking to, it's getting colder, so a lot of people are going to try and find alternative ways to
Stay warm in
their
their
house.
house.
So
Right.
can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. Smoke detectors save lives. We know that. They're proven, but they have to be working properly, and they have to be checked and maintained. You can't just put it up and walk away. And a lot of detectors will chirp and cause
Right.
an annoyance when the battery goes down.
Yeah.
But you don't want it to get to that point. You want to really change those batteries twice a year. So when we change the clocks, we tell everybody to change batteries. Even if you have hardwired into your electrical system smoke detectors, there's usually a battery backup. So make sure that if you have hardwired, even check those batteries and change them periodically, twice a year if you will. Having them located outside your bedroom and keeping your bedroom door closed, most people don't realize keeping that door closed, if a fire starts in another portion of the home, keeping that door closed gives you time.
Wow.
The detector on the outside of the door should alarm, awaken you, and you can get out. If you get to the door and it's hot, that's why we tell people to touch the door with the back of their hand to see if it's hot. If it's hot, you need to go out your window or make an alternative escape route. Without those things in place, without the smoke detectors, if you're sleeping and carbon monoxide builds up with smoke, you can actually go into a deeper sleep unless you smell it and not be awakened to a fire. So smoke detectors, I'm a big fan.
Yeah.
I'm also a big fan of sprinkler systems.
Yeah.
We're seeing some of those being placed in homes now, and I'm a real advocate for the residential sprinkler systems. I think that's something that we should all be doing, especially if we're building a new property or building a new home, and we have the opportunity. I would put sprinkler systems in.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
I never really thought about putting that in my home, but that certainly if you're building from the ground up, why not if you have that option?
Yeah.
Again, so people this time of year, they're going to start turning their furnaces on for the first time, or maybe some people are looking for, maybe they're going to burn wood in their home.
Right.
Propane tanks, we hear this a lot. How dangerous is it, and what should you do to just make sure that you're heating your house safely?
Well, to do it safely, you really should have a service technician come out and make sure that your equipment is maintained
Up to par,
properly. You want to make sure that it's not going to cause any, especially if it's burning fuel, fossil fuels, propane, natural gas. You want to make sure that the combustion chamber is not cracked. Otherwise, you can get carbon monoxide leaching into your home. You want to make sure that the filters are changed. Make sure that the chimney is not clogged or something with bird's nest or something that would cause the gases to build up in your home. All those things I know it's simplistic, and most people just crank on the heat and flip the coin and hope that it works.
Hope that it's okay.
It really ought to be looked at by a service technician or somebody that knows how to maintain properly that equipment. And then if you use alternative means of heat, for instance, the fireplace, make sure that chimney's also been checked and that there's not cracks, because it could, from one year to another, a crack could happen and you not know about it, and embers can get into your attic and set your home on fire without your knowledge. So having those cleaned out, having the creosote cleaned out on the chimneys that burn fire or wood in the fireplace is very, very important, and making sure that it's not cracked.
And I would think that may even be especially true this year. A lot of communities in our viewing area were impacted by the Memorial Day tornadoes, and you may not know that your chimney, while you may think, oh, I didn't sustain any damage, I was lucky, maybe your structure and your chimney
had a little bit
got
of shift.
shifted a little bit.
Yeah.
Absolutely. If a tree come down on your home and it could have caused some damage to your roof. You wouldn't think that it would damage your chimney, but you really ought to have it looked at. So that's a great point. And people that are chimney sweeps, they can come out with cameras and make sure that it's proper. So good point. Also, space heaters. I'm not a fan of space heaters. A lot of people use them, but if you're going to use them properly. Make sure that they have the fall-over protection, so if they fall over, they shut off. Make sure that they're unplugged after use.
Right.
And don't use them as primary heat. A lot of people overload circuits by plugging in multiple space heaters when, like, a room is cold, and the electrical system wasn't designed for that. So sometimes we'll have fires in attics caused by multiple space heaters being utilized.
Yeah, you didn't even think about that, but it does make sense.
Yeah, and unfortunately, we, in the news business, we're going to hear these stories of fire and carbon monoxide poisoning. Are there any symptoms that someone would feel to know that perhaps there is, carbon dioxide building up?
Carbon monoxide can build up over time, and if you're exposed to a certain threshold level, around 30 parts per million, you may get a headache, but it gets into your bloodstream and it doesn't just dissipate. It actually causes and blocks the oxygen from being able to be exchanged in your lungs, so it has an affinity for those blood cells, so it really blocks the oxygen receptors. So over time you can build up, and when you start having headaches, feeling nauseous, and it's not necessarily the flu or some other reason, you really ought to start thinking carbon monoxide. And like we talked about with smoke detectors, if you burn fossil fuels, a carbon monoxide detector is a vital component also to being safe in your home.
Yeah, I was going to say that's something, of course we have in our home. But yeah, you need to make sure also that the batteries are working on that.
Absolutely.
And yes, people might not think about the carbon monoxide detector,
and
but that's a good idea.
The sensors will go bad on those detectors. About every 10 years you're going to have to buy a new one.
Okay.
So check it, make sure the batteries are changed. I would change the smoke detector batteries along with the carbon monoxide batteries. And if it starts to chirp, it may be time for a new one.
And you can pick up those at any local hardware store, correct?
You can.
Oh yeah, even like drugstores. Like you can get one at CVS.
We're so passionate about it that if we come into a home, we have carbon monoxide detectors and smoke detectors on our apparatus, that if somebody doesn't have one, we'll put one up for them. Just make sure that they're safe.
That's wonderful. Going back a little bit to the brush fires and what you've dealt with so far this year, you kind of explained one of them. Is there anything year to year, does it seem like a different type of year to you? Has there been any like wild, I don't want to say wildfire because like you said, we don't have the same setup as California. But when you had mentioned earlier that the fire that was in the woods, it impacted part of the woods and it impacted, an abandoned home, but that very easily could have happened and it reached a real house. So
certainly. And this time of year, we'll also start seeing fires along the roadways.
Yeah.
Cigarettes being disposed of, not properly, just flipped out. So we'll see medians that will catch on fire. We'll see a lot of fires in mulch beds outside of businesses because people will throw their cigarettes. So if you smoke, please put out your cigarette in a proper container and make sure that it's completely out. Don't just throw it outside. You get a smoking condition on a highway, and we have 75 and 675. That could cause crashes as well. And then you have to put our responders are out there in the middle of that smoke, and so we are in jeopardy. So I would advocate make sure that with the dry conditions we've got, your smoking material is put out properly.
Okay.
Otherwise, when you asked about is this year
does
different?
it stick out or is it sticking out?
So the conditions are much more dry. When we start seeing the grass turn brown, which does happen a lot in September and October, but I can't recall that we've been this dry for this long in quite some time. So, and like we talked about the farmers, that's really indicative of, all right, the conditions are very dry when they're able to harvest that corn.
Right, they can just put the corn right in the bins.
That's your threshold. Is there a special technique that you guys use when you're going to a brush fire situation that's different from a house fire?
Sure, we will triage. We will basically look at what's most severely threatened of value. We're going to look at life safety first. If anybody's in harm's way, we're going to get them out and try to protect them. But the wind is such a driving force that you've got to make sure where this fire is going. You have to anticipate where it could be, and if it's going towards a structure or something of value, we're going to try to get out ahead of it and flank it with our resources. And so we have a pickup truck. It's called a grass unit, and so it's got a skid in the back that's got a pump and a tank, and it's a 4-wheel drive. And we'll go
Okay.
out. We only have one, but we'll call our neighbors.
Right.
It's usually a big party with all the fire departments.
Yeah.
Bring in water, and we'll bring in all of these grass trucks and try to get out ahead of it.
Okay.
But again, we're not superheroes, so
Right.
we can't stop. Mother Nature is going to win. If a fire gets going and it gets a lot of speed ahead of it, it can actually generate its own wind itself, and you've
Yeah.
probably seen that, and create some kind of velocity that will pick up speed. So, like I said, we will try to triage and try to get out in front of what's going to burn next, and prevent it from getting to something of value.
Okay. Do you, and I apologize if maybe you're not familiar with it, but when we had the fire that was some of the debris from the tornado, and they kind of had said they were watching it, but at that point I think they were just going to kind of let it burn and just monitor.
Sure.
Is that something that happens when, you know, it wasn't something of value,
Right.
you know,
In a
but
lot
it
of
just
cases,
kind of,
if it's not going to cause and not transfer anywhere, burning it completely is
Yeah.
going to be safer than trying to extinguish it. You're putting a lot of resources, and a fire that's deep-seated, like those piles of debris, you're probably going to have to break those up with heavy equipment. You have to risk lives to go in and do that with equipment, break it up and put it out. Otherwise, there's not a lot of water. And you could put tons of water, thousands and thousands of gallons on it.
Yeah.
And if it's deep-seated enough, you're not going to get it out.
Okay. I was actually thinking as well, and you kind of touched on this, but unlike cities where you can tap into fire hydrants,
Right.
it's so different when you're in rural communities, correct?
Yes, my community of Sugarcreek is about 30% rural, where we have no hydrants, so we have to call in tankers or have water transported in by trucks. So yeah, it's a little different. When you have unlimited water supply and you have great pressure,
Right.
we can do a lot of good things, but
Yeah.
you have to be very, very tactically savvy when you have no water, limited resources. You have to bring that in, and it takes time to get it all set up. So that's one of the things we want to make sure that people realize when they set something on fire.
Yeah.
It's going to take us a while to get there and bring in all the stuff that we need to put it out efficiently.
And I mean, anytime you guys fight a fire, you are risking your lives. So it's like, really, do you need to burn that in the middle of the field or whatever people were doing? It's, I don't know. I just feel
People
like
are going to do what they do, but you know, maybe
try to think about it.
there will be that thought of maybe this time I'll just
just
it's
wait.
too windy. You know what? Let's just not have a fire tonight. We
Yeah.
Not
can
a
do it
great,
next
not
weekend.
a great day.
Yeah.
The fire we had in the cornfield, some neighbors brought over some skid loaders
Okay.
and heavy equipment and started making a fire break. They were actually dragging the stubble away and down to bare dirt, which it helped a lot. It's kept it from moving into that standing corn. So
That's helpful.
and we don't have those resources.
Right, so you're like,
So
thanks.
we're just very thankful
Yeah.
that day that they showed up and started helping out a lot.
Wow. Anything else? I guess just any tips that you want to go over one more time, maybe for people that we're still in the heart of fall and we are going to get into the cold of winter soon. So just if you're a homeowner, if you own property, what would you just tell people now for some fire safety?
I would say go to the Ohio revised code, or
Yeah.
you can go online and look up the burn restrictions in Ohio.
Okay.
You'll come up with a lot of things from RAPCA, or Regional Air Pollution Control Authority, which is an arm of the Ohio EPA. They have the restrictions on like burning in your backyard.
Okay.
Like I said, it's that 2 by 2 by 3 or 3 by 3 by 2
Yep.
foot fire.
Okay.
And if you get larger than that, it has to be 1,000 feet away from a structure.
Okay.
That's not yours.
Yeah.
And make sure that you're not burning anything of trash or debris. It has to be something that was grown on your property. You can't bring in, that's something else. You can't bring in brush from somebody else's property and burn it on yours. It has to be grown on your place.
Didn't know that.
No.
Yeah. And if you're going to burn, just make sure that you stay with it
Yeah.
and that you have the ability to put it out if it gets out of hand.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Jeff.
Yeah, it was wonderful to speak with you. Hopefully this was as educational to you as it was to McCall and I, because really I definitely learned a lot that I didn't realize. And we as Storm Center 7 meteorologists are continuing to monitor our drought. Let's see, it's October 18th right now?
Somewhere around the middle of October.
Somewhere around the middle of October. We're still deep in a drought. We have not gotten any really real relief, and we've spoken about this before, McCall, but it's not just a half inch of rain here, a half inch of rain here. Honestly, the remnants of a tropical system would be fantastic to give us prolonged rainfall, which we're not done with hurricane season, so it is something that even if we can just get that tropical moisture up in
Just
here,
one of those would help.
Just one of those would help. So as meteorologists, meteorologist will keep watching that for you. And of course, your fire department, your local firefighters, they're going to be working hard. So try to help them out and be smart this year.
Yes, and thank you guys for joining us. If you're watching us, thank you for joining our vodcast. If you're listening to Cloudy with a Chance of Podcast, make sure you download, subscribe, share this with your friends. You can also write a review and comments within our podcast, and you can download, listen, and subscribe on your Apple Podcast app, as well as on Google Play, Stitcher, and WHIO.com. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.